Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 11 of this course, Language Acquisition and Processing. So, in this week, we will discuss the idea of language learning from a wider perspective, from the learner perspective, from more of the different factors that impact language learning process. This chapter focuses on the individual differences in language learning. And in this chapter, we will discuss different factors and different elements that play a role in language learning. Some of them are cognitive, some of them are affective, some of them are social, or even some of them are more perceptual. So these individual differences play a role in language learning, and also they impact our idea of success in acquiring the target language. As we discussed in chapter and in the first part of the course, that there are different factors that impact child language acquisition. In this chapter, we're going to see different aspects of this language acquisition on the older learner's perspective and how the individual characteristics and learning environment influence their success in language learning. So, before getting into the different aspects and the individualistic or individual differences, I want you to think through your own experience. Think about when you have been introduced to a second language or a foreign language. Think about the different factors that you think contributed to your success in learning this language, and how do they relate to the research you have read on individual differences? Think of also of some languages that you started learning, but you decided not to go through this. Think about why you ended up dropping this experience or dropping your attempt to learn this language. What are the factors you think contributed to this unsuccessful attempt? And how do they relate to the research you've read in this chapter on individual differences? All of us at some point or another have tried to learn another language or a third language, maybe a fourth language for some people. Some of the language we started to learn, we decided to continue doing that, and eventually we're able to be a second language learner or second language speakers of this target language. And at some point, when we are trying to acquire another language, we might ended up deciding not to go any further with this attempt. Think about why. Was it because of something like in your learning style? Was it because of something cognitive? Was it more of social related aspects? Was it more of affective related aspects, personality thing? Or was it more of the context that you're learning the language in? So there are a lot of factors related to this. And these factors determine how in the individualistic differences contribute to second language acquisition. However, when we are discussing these different aspects or individual differences, they are not easy to assess and evaluate. Think of like motivation or extroversion. It's not easy to assess this concept because it a lot of other elements of variable might be in play while you are assessing it from only one perspective. So finding some kind of correlational relationship between these individual differences and the success in language learning is very challenging, as we will see in this chapter. It's not of a causal relationship, cause and effect. When we have motivation, we're going to be successful language learner. We can't make this claim because still other factors are included. And also, we cannot say for sure that the existence or the lack of this factors is the only cause or effect of having this kind of progress in language learning. So, saying for sure that we have positive or negative correlation is not easy in language learning. Maybe like in mathematics or when you're doing some kind of statistical studies, it's way easier than doing this in learning or educational context. So some of the study that have been conducted try to find or explore this kind of correlation or relationship. Some of them highlighted some positive correlation, which means whenever we have motivation, whenever the learner is motivated, there is likely a huge chance of success in language learning process. Some of them highlighted that while successful learners have been found in general to be quite motivated, so whenever we have the learner being motivated, the success rate is there. There is a success in language learning. And also however, the opposite hasn't been found because unsuccessful language learners are not necessarily unmotivated. There may be other reasons explaining their lack of success. For example, they may simply not have sufficient opportunity for contact with the target language. So saying that the existence of motivation or the absence of motivation is a influential factor in the success on language learning is kind of problematic. And that's one of the things that we face when we do some empirical research in language learning, trying to explore the impact of individual differences. The idea of saying for sure that we have positive or negative correlation between these individual differences and the success in language learning. Uh, Age, for example, think about age. Like, as we said, age might be a factor, even in child language acquisition. In second language acquisition, still it is a factor, as we find out later on this in this lecture. So some of them highlighted some study that have been conducted so far, highlighted some negative correlation. However, they vary in opposite direction. Like some research shows that adolescents and adults are more efficient language learners at least in the early stages. And some adults do manage to attain native-like command of second language. Even they just like, especially in the early stages, they can do way better than children. However, children will be able to catch up later, but still, age here, there is some kind of negative correlation. So, with that being said, like the idea of saying for sure that we have positive, negative is not a clear-cut thing in language learning. We can explore the different learner characteristics that might play a role in second language success or second language acquisition. There are different characteristics. So, for example, the idea of intelligence or aptitude, or the learner's learning styles, the preferred habitual way of learning, or the personality features or traits. Also, motivation and attitude towards the second language community or the second language in general. Even some social factors like the identity, the self perception, and the affiliation that they have, ethnic group affiliation that they have, beliefs of the learner itself play a role in this. Their beliefs towards the instruction, the teacher, their beliefs towards the significance of learning this language, their beliefs about the culture itself, and whether we have like uh, more cultural engagement or less cultural engagement, whether you are trying to learn the language of the majority in a social circle or the minority on the of a social circle. Also, age is one of the most common factor that have been explored either in first language or second language acquisition. So we're going to discuss them one by one. So for the aptitude factors, so aptitude is the ability to learn quickly. So it has different components. So some of them is the learner's ability to identify and memorize new sounds, to understand the function of particular words in sentences, to figure out the grammatical rules from language samples, to remember new words, and also some of the factors that impact the aptitude of the learner is the working memory, like how they process the information before retaining or being able to attain this information. And also, one thing that have been highlighted by Spada and Lipo in this chapter is the idea of successful learner may not be strong in all aspects of aptitude. So you might end up in your class or when you are teaching a group of students, you might have some of your students who are good at the first component, while the rest of your class might be very good at the last component. The question is, the aptitude, is it a good predicator of success in second language environment, on second language acquisition? Some studies highlighted, like for example, Westcott 1981 determined learners' aptitude profiles and placed them in language programs that were compatible with those profiles. And the finding was that better results than when not matched. So they divided the students into those who are more of having more of these components based on preferring the deductive inductive approach, and they highlighted that the better results will be with those who are matched with their aptitude components than those who are not, who have been assigned to context or instructional material that do not that are not compatible with their own features or profiles. Leila Ranta 2002 highlighted that children with a strong language analytic ability were the most successful learner in meaning-oriented programs. So the existence of aptitude itself plays a role in language acquisition. but the generalization is very challenging. And also, we still need more research into to have more solid finding that we can share for sure. Learning style is also another element in language acquisition. And in learning style, maybe you have heard a lot of people, even in your classes, even during high school, or when you are taking any other educational related teaching, pedagogical related classes, explaining the idea of learning style, which is the preferred way of learning or the habitual way of learning stuff. So you might heard people saying, "Oh, I'm a visual learner," or you might heard people say, "I'm a more audio learner." And this idea of learning style started back in the 70s with different teaching methodology, especially with the grammar translation methods and the audiolingual approach. And the audiolingual approach and the grammar translation, like the grammar was more focused on reading stuff and copying material from the target language in order to improve your writing abilities. And while the audiolingual approach focuses more on listening and speaking. So they highlighted that learning style play a role in the success in second language learning. And research highlighted like we have visual learner, we have kinesthetic learners, and we have audio learner. And if we accept this hypothesis, that will be a huge challenge to anyone who's teaching. Just imagine having a class of 50 students. Some of them are audio, some of them are visual, some of them are more of kinesthetic people. So finding instructional approaches that meet the needs of learner with a variety of aptitude and learning style could be like overwhelming and even far-reaching, to be honest. Especially like if you have a larger classroom, including like 50 or more. And this idea of learning style, one of the, I would say, the counter argument against it is just like have been provided in some studies mentioned in the book. And one of them is the idea of able to speak different languages. Like some people have this kind of talent. They are faster in learning languages than others. Like you might see people who are speaking 4, 5, 7 languages. So highlighting the idea of learning style and matching your learning style with the material might be helpful, beneficial, but it's not well supported in research. Moving on to another factor, which is the personality traits or features of the learner. So some studies, and which, if you think about it, would make sense. Introversion is a good factor, and extrovert learner might be more successful in language learning because they are able to communicate, they are able to use the language in different contexts, the lack of inhibition when they are interacting. So, and anxiety is also another factor. While an anxiety is not in itself a statistic trait, it's a more of a dynamic thing. But is all anxiety bad? Because not all of an anxiety is, we would say, is bad because sometimes we feel anxious about something and we started to work accordingly in order to pass it. So maybe we're going to need some anxiety in order to succeed in language learning. And some factor might be the idea of willing to communicate. And anxiety plays a role, in the willingness to communicate, because some people might feel anxious to communicate, and your willingness doesn't mean you're not a good learner, but might be because of the anxiety. So, research so far doesn't show a simple relationship between personality trait and second language learning. Motivation is another factor. So, before getting into the impact of motivation on language learning success, we need to define motivation. Like in the book, we have two types of motivation. We have integrative motivation, which is learning for personal growth and cultural enrichment. Why are you learning the language? In order to have just like more opportunity, being able to work in different spaces that welcome multilingual people, and maybe cultural enrichment. You will be more culturally competent when you are learning the language. You will be able to communicate people, make friends, all of this kind of thing. Some people are also, or motivation also comes from instrumental paces, like learning the language for more immediate or practical goals, like for communicating, for communication, for making money, for maybe your job needs some kind of translation, this kind of thing. So the first one is more of a personal thing. The second one is more of being professional oriented or profession oriented, or more of like the wider context. So motivation itself is more of a process, and it has different stages. And the existence of motivation itself is not like a positively correlated factor to success in language acquisition or language learning. Zoltan Dornay, for example, 2001, highlighted three different stages of motivation. One of them is the choice, and then he explained the other two in the book, in the chapter itself. So the existence of these three phases of motivation are not like all the time impacting language learning. So think about the impact of like motivation in a classroom. To what extent having students who are motivated in your class is going to impact their language learning? So Zoltan Dornay, for example, highlighted the three phases of motivation. He said, we're having choice motivation, which is basically you start doing the thing. I decided to learn Spanish, or you start to set a goal to learn German. So that's the choice part. And then the second stage or the second phase is the execute motivation, which is your intention to do what it takes to learn this, or to go through the process of learning. Your ability to do the necessary tasks, your ability to memorize words, your persistence to keep doing that. And then the last stage is the motivation retrospection, which is your reaction to the performance you're doing so far in the target language. Moving on to the motivation in classroom, if you're teaching, do you think motivation is a factor that impacts your students' performance in class? So in Golto and Dordnai 2008 study, they highlighted four motivation practices: teacher discourse, participation structure, activity design, and the positive retrospect self-evaluation and activity design. So all of these factors, based on their study, play a role in establishing or having this kind of motivation in the classroom. And some of these have in the studies highlighted some positive correlation between student success and also the existence of these different praxis of motivation. Another set of factors are related to is related to identity and the ethnic group affiliation. Power relationship, for example, learning the majority language versus minority language, or the idea of investment and identity, like adult immigrant learner in the English workplace, investment, or the idea of enhancing your identity or cultural enrichment. And Norton highlighted this part in his study, and Tuhey in 2000 highlighted that child immigrant students in English kindergarten classes showed this identity part. Interestingly, in Tomato 2011, he revealed a very interesting impact and finding about the Japanese students and their peers. And as mentioned in the book, some of the students intentionally made some errors because some other factors are included, especially the ethnic group affiliation, like showing off, or they are not better than their peers, or even highlighting the idea of affiliating with being a more of a second language learner. And that's why they are highlighting the foreign accents, even if, and that was very surprising when I was reading this study, because again, when you're learning a language, you want to do what it takes to show your competence, but intentionally to make errors and to have this foreign accent when you're speaking that language was so interesting. So, which indicates the impact of identity and the ethnic group affiliation as a factor in second language performance and development. Another factor has to do with the learner beliefs. Maybe, for example, preferences for different types of instructions. Some of your students might ended up having some other belief system about what would be the best way to teach this concept, or maybe the teaching style is not that good enough. Like the belief itself might impact their engagement and their investment in the language development, the language acquisition. So think about like the form-based versus communicative approaches of teaching or delivering of instructional material, even the idea of corrective feedback or providing feedback. So it is so important for teachers to explore these preferences and assumptions, especially when you're teaching adult learner, because they come to your class with a lot of beliefs about you as a teacher. I mean, about the material itself that they are studying, about the community, the second language community, or the second language culture, or the second language language itself, the second language system. So what we need to do is to help our learners explore their repertoire of learning strategies. A very important factors in language acquisition is age. And we already discussed this thoroughly in the first part of the course. And we highlighted the CBH, the critical period hypothesis for language learning. And according to this hypothesis, that child second language learner typically more successful than adult second language learner because of the innate mechanism, because of the elasticity of the brain before puberty, and all of these factors have been, we have discussed it thoroughly in the first part of the course. There are some biological, cognitive, contextual factors included, of course, like older learner may depend on more general learning skills. They are coming to the second language learning with already a set of a linguistic system, uh, already hardly wired in their brain with of the first language, and maybe not as effective as innate ability specific to language that young learners have access to before this window or innate mechanism come to hold. However, it's difficult to compare old and younger learner, not just age that's different. A lot of other factors included. Some studies tried to explore the impact of CPH for second language acquisition. So Botswisky in 1980, for example, he studied the effects of age on the mastery of second language features. The participants were 67 highly educated immigrants and 15 native speakers. The second language was English, and the task was interviewing all the participants. Trained native speakers were asked to rate the participants' knowledge of second language on a scale from 0 to 2. And the result, which was interesting, that young learner judged it to be more native-like than older learners. So here it shows that the earlier you start the language learning, it is more likely that you're going to be more successful. Another support has been reported by Johnson and Newport in 1989. They studied the effect of language or learner intuition of grammaticality. So they recruited 46 Chinese and Korean ESL learner and 23 native speaker learning. The target language was English. And the task was to hear and judge correct versus incorrect grammatical structures. Testing 12 rules of English morphology and syntax. The findings that young learners did better than old starters. Also, Snow and Hawley in 1978, they studied the effect of age on the rate of acquisition. The participants were children aged 3 to 10, adolescent 12 to 15, and adult 18 to 60. The target language in this case was Toch as a second language, and the task was 9 tests of language knowledge and use. Testing 3 times at 4 to 5 months intervals. And the results, which was interesting, that old learner had an initial advantage in the early stages, but young learner caught up over time, and eventually young learner surpassed old learners. However, if you think about the CPH, we also need to consider that there are some advantages for old learners. First, they are more efficient than young learners. They have a lot of like skill set that they bring to the language learning experience. Start off faster, greater meta-linguistic knowledge, problem-solving skills, However, young learners catch up with and surpasses old learner in the naturalistic context, but not in the structured, instructed context. Another study Mendoza in 2006 and 11, the young learner caught up with old learner on oral, but not in written task. And young learner didn't surpass old learner over time, 9 years. So that's why we need also to revisit the CPH. So CPH applies only to implicit learning to abstract structures. Implicit learning is activated in a naturalistic setting with massive exposure. So explicit learning is activated in school setting, and therefore the effectiveness of implicit and explicit learning mechanisms is context dependent. So saying that the CPH is a beneficial or influential factors alone is also less supported in the research literature. So the question that we still need to address, at what age should second language instruction begin? And the answer to this question depends on some factors. Learner goals, for example, the aptitude, the ability to communicate, willing to communicate as well, function in the language. And some people would set the goal for their language learning experience to attain a native like um, a competence level. While in fact, we should a little bit change this into the native like language use shouldn't be a goal for many second language learner. Just like being intelligible, being able to communicate, being able to understand the message during communication should be the goal for second language learner. And early start comes with risks, particularly for minority language learner. And the amount of instruction, it could be 1 or 2 hours a week. And in this case, the amount of instruction, like 1 or 2 hours a week, doesn't produce an advanced second language speaker, no matter how young they start. And the older learner make better use of the time. So here we can conclude that all of these individual differences play a role in language acquisition. Although some of them are less supported in the research literature so far, and still more studies are needed, but also the language learning process is a very complicated one. And also we should approach all the findings of most of the study introduced so far with some caution, because most of them depend on the idea of quantitative results, like as we have noticed, like the scores on some tests or the grammaticality, and the generalization is not always something that we can build theories on. So we need more of other approaches like qualitative or mixed method that have numbers and also detailed description of the different processes and factors and features that impact language learning. Also, the idea of the CPH age is necessary, of course, it's a factor, but it's not sufficient for successful second language learning. Many other factors in play. So that's all we have for this week. So make sure to uh, work on the discussion post due for this week. And feel free to reach out to stop by my office hours or send me an email if you have any question or concern, and we can schedule a Zoom meeting to see how I can support you through this second part of the course. Keep up the good work and see you next week.